Oh, 700 years ago or so, up in the wild northern lands, by the hard mountains, there lived a noblewoman called Meg, she the fire-haired child of a lord of Penrith. And yet, when she died, her mother died, and her father, who knew he could love no other, would not marry again, and spent his life fretting, wishing she had been a boy. For he knew that when she was married, she would take with her as a dowry the lordship of Carlisle and Penrith. But Meg didn't care for any of that. She was, as I said, a wild, wild child with long red hair, always away up upon the high fell, the Houskills and the Skiddles. Lost in the mist, men said, and others less kind, that she was ever found amongst the old stones, that they spoke to her with voices 1,000 years dead, that the very yews seemed to bow to her. Now her father then decided that she must marry one of the Reaper lords, but Meg had other ideas. She had fallen in love with a lord of the south, an offshoot of the lords of Lancaster, and in secret she married him. And her father was angry, for this was not some great house. He was a man without hope or future, and more than that, her father said, he drinks. For Meg might be too wild to be a judge of men, but I know a judge when I see one. And it was true. Meg went to live in the south, in Preston, and there she bore her new husband in great happiness 7 daughters, as beautiful as herself, with wild red hair. And at the end of it, she declared that she could have no more children. And her husband fretted, for it seemed to him what little land he had would dissolve into dowries. And so it was he took to drink, and drank more and more, as Meg and her children danced wildly amongst the yew trees. And he drank more and more, as Meg led her daughters up into the moor to play to the stars. One time Meg came back, and her husband had drunk himself to death. Well, as she had had no male heirs, and her daughters were unmarried, the estates went back to the Duchy of Lancaster. And so Meg found herself at the mercy of her father. But her father was now an old, broken man. He had already made a will that had cut Meg out of all inheritance, giving it to a male cousin. And Meg had not been in the house more than a month before he died. And the heir threw Meg out. But she didn't seem to care. She went then up into the Houskill fells, and called all her daughters to her, and all those would follow, and they danced under the wild moonlight, howling, and men said they raised storm, and called the rain of blood each moment down. And men said that wise women went to see Meg, and she taught them their path and their ways. Her midwife she was, the wisest of them. And if Meg delivered your child, particularly if it was a daughter, you were certain to live. Well, Meg lived, it had to be said, not just by magic and dancing under the moonlight, but by highway robbery. And so it was, all the lands between Skiddaw and Houskill were hers to hold as she would. As far as Inglewood, she and her women would raid stagecoaches and rich men's houses, stealing gold and stealing food. And then they would have wild parties there on the moor, dancing in the moonlight, calling down the storms, so that white lightning streaked on the black, black sky, dyeing the moon red with their power. And the lords of Carlisle looked out in fear, and the lords of Penrith shivered in their swords, and the lords the south of Preston put a price upon her head. It did not matter, they said, what power was used, as long as Meg and her reign of terror in the north was broken. But none would betray Meg, for she was not hated amongst the folk, rather loved. For if she robbed only the wealthy. And if she stole what could have been, the poor said, should have been theirs all along. Nobody acted against Meg until Nicholas Scott came home. Yes, that Nicholas Scott, the black necromancer of the Middle Ages. He who as a young man had sold his soul to Satan, if Satan was clever enough to catch him. He then, who had been one of the last generations to learn diabolism in the Black School of Sorbonne. He then, who had travelled down to Spain, and there learned from Arab sorcerers their many and shifting ways. He then, who had travelled south to Africa, and had lived for a while with the Noor, down at the root of the Nile, and learned from them their powers. He then, who had gone back north, up through the wild lands to the east, who men said had tea with Baba Yaga before he came quite home. He then, the master of shape and shadow, lord of storm, he who would blink in the blink of an eye, appear, act, and be gone. He then, who was always fighting some kind of running battle with the devil, where he would offer the devil his soul if the devil would do as he wished. And the devil always did, for he knew that if he let Nicholas live, more souls would come to him. And it was true, all the actions that Nicholas did that summoned up the devil filled hell aplenty. For he allowed the devil to slay unrepentant souls. Well, Nicholas, hearing of the great rewards of the lords of Preston, fully up to half their kingdom, rode north. But he did not know where to look for Meg, for she was cunning. She followed not the ways that he did, but rather the old ways of root and twig and branch, the old ways of the moonlight, and Nicholas could not find her. But by chance, one of the greatest rituals in Meg's life was the dark of the moon after midsummer, and that moon she rode to in a storm. And so it was, Nicholas, one day, looking out of Carlisle Castle, saw afar off, travelling against the wind, it seemed to him, storm clouds. And he asked the lords of Carlisle where they went. And the lords looked out, far into Inglewood, where once the loathly damsel had walked, and said, "There is a Stonehenge there. Perhaps she is there, for that is where they always dance." And Nicholas said, "Tell me about it." And the Lord said, "Oh, it's an old, old place. A ditch, a round enclosure. There was once 4 stones, but we have one in the cathedral. There are now only 3. Yes, it is likely as not she is there." And Nicholas passed in the twinkling of an eye. And there he stood under stormlight. And there was Meg with all her daughters, and all those that would follow her, all the many women proud, dancing round and round and round under the blood moon. And Meg, it seemed, was covered in blood, from where Nicholas could hardly guess. And she laughed as she danced, as the red lightning streaked down, and she revelled in her power. And Nicholas, seeing that she had a power unlike his, summoned up the devil. And the devil stood by him and said, "Well, Nicholas, have you come to surrender your own to me?" And Nicholas said, "No fear. And you know I am invulnerable." And here he tapped his head to show the devil he still wore the cap of silver he always wore. For men said, as long as he wore, he would die by a blow to the head. And since that prophecy had been made by Beelzebub himself, Nicholas wore a cap of the hardest silver that no sword could break or axe dent. And the devil looked at the cap and nodded and said, "I see, Nicholas, I see. Well, what would you say to me then?" And Nicholas said, "Look, there is Meg and her daughters dancing. Why don't you go to be their fiddler? And make them dance. For today is the day before the Sabbath, and they are sure to forget the fate of those who dance so long. And when they dance into death, their souls will be yours." And Nicholas smiled, but the devil laughed. And he turned himself then into a player of the violin, and he started to play wild, mad tunes. Around and around, around and around, around and around they went. And Meg and her daughters danced, at first in joy and in delight, but increasingly in fear. For they knew the ancient charms. Although they followed the ancient ways, that land was cursed, and you did not dance on Sabbath days. But still they could not stop themselves, dancing round and round and round. And all the while the henge started to shake and to spin and to spin and to shake as the old witnesses of old powers reached towards the devil. But the devil played even louder, even faster, as the storms lashed, as Nicholas smiled, as the bells of distant Penrith sounded the midnight hour. And suddenly it was over. And where the dancers had been, only rocks remained. Great stones dancing in a ring. But last of all to change was Meg. And as she changed, she muttered a charm at Nicholas. "Nicholas, Nicholas, we were not yours to claim. I, as I turn to stone, become what I always was. A one with the powers of bone, a one with the powers, the old wind and moor and light. I am not yours to claim." And it was as if for a moment the yew trees of the henge themselves moved. And the devil looked confused, for the souls he reached to grab were not there, and those he thought were damned were merely turned to stone, still dancing round and round, but so slowly now that men could not see them move, that men would only see great stones. And over them all stood Meg, a single great lump, a single great red stone, as if one of the stones of Carlisle had been thrown here into Inglewood. Sharp and fierce, tall and threatening she seemed. And the devil stood back, and then he turned to Nicholas and said, "The fate of this woman lies upon your conscience, Nicholas. And if I will not claim your soul sooner rather than later, you must go to the church." And Nicholas felt that curse. And it was true, there was something about Meg's final charm. There was something about the screams of her daughters as they had been turned to stone that lay heavily upon him and all he called his own. And so he rode into Carlisle and went to the cathedral, as in a trance. But the bishop turned to him and said, "You cannot come in here, not with that helmet. I will not give you mass while you wear a cap." And Nicholas took off his hat, but kept on his silver helmet, and knelt upon the altar rail. And the bishop shook his head and said, "No, I will not bless you. I will not give you the Holy Host while you wear the weapons of war." And thinking that he was safe, for surely the devil could not reach into the cathedral, Nicholas took off his cap of silver as the bishop came round with host and oil. But just then, just at that moment, the final great stone from the 4 original monoliths, the one that had been taken from Carlisle and put it in the cathedral, and men thought had been blessed where it was once cursed, fell and crushed Nicholas, cap, head, and all. And so he was taken to hell, and men said they could hear the devil cackling. Now he had his own. And Meg, she still dances there in the north, with all her daughters around her. And it is said, by those who learn of stone and wind and bone, those who learn the ways of the yew, and what is written in its charms, that Meg is alive and all her daughters live, but they move so slowly round and round and round. And if anyone could count their number, under the twisting stone, under the moving trees, and counted the same another time, and counted still the same a third, that Meg and all her daughters would step free to dance their wild power. But that none yet have. Not yet, indeed. Not yet.